Last week, the New York Times released a video showing ambulances in the Gaza Strip coming under fire, which raised a lot of questions, understandably so. First off, why are ambulances being shot at? But also, this seems to directly contradict a statement put out by the IDF just a few days prior. So today we're going to dig into what we know so far and try to pick this apart as best we can. And to do that, we're talking with Tal Hagen. Tal is an information warfare researcher at Fake Reporter, and Fake Reporter is an Israeli organization that serves as a connection between experts and the public to combat online malicious content. You can find Tal's information as well as that of Fake Reporter in the description below. Be sure to go check them out and follow along with this thread that we're talking through. And with that, let's get to the conversation. All right, Tal, thank you so much, man, for taking the time. I have shared this thread that you put together on X that we were just talking before we started, like 8 hours or more to put this together. And I don't doubt that one bit. But I'm looking forward to getting your take on what exactly happened with this ambulance incident in Gaza a couple weeks ago. Can we start really high level and explain, like, what's the initial controversy here in just a minute or two?
Yeah, so the initial controversy was completely contradictory statements made by both the different medical organizations, the Palestinian Red Cross Society and the Civil Defense, as well as UN representatives against the word of the Israeli Defense Forces, essentially as to what occurred. While, if you're summing it down, the IDF conveyed that they had initially ambushed a Palestinian police vehicle, which is organized by Hamas, and then afterwards there was a suspicious convoy that came afterwards, which they opened fire on. According to the different medical societies, there were 3 different convoys that were coming in. You had the initial ambulance that was ambushed by the IDF for no reason. Then there was a secondary convoy that came with many more vehicles, which is what we see in the New York Times video that went out and became viral. And then there was another ambulance that came afterwards, and all 3 of these different convoys were ambushed by the IDF as soon as they got to the area. So 2 very, very conflicting points. One is we have an intentional ambush of medical services and targeting medics, while the other is talking about the targeting of Hamas operatives as well as Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives, and then misidentification of a second convoy.
Okay, perfect. So we should mention that we're recording this on April 14th. We're still waiting for the IDF investigation, I believe, right? That nothing official's come out there? Okay.
No.
So when you're putting this thread together here, because this was challenging, and we're just scrolling through it fast, and we're going to take our time walking through this, but where do you start with something like this? And can you just walk through your findings as of today? I know this report's about a week old. If anything's changed, we'll get into that.
So with these type of threads, the first mode of conduct is all the information that we have available. Sometimes the hardest point of understanding what occurred is having all the information available to us. It wasn't that easy to collect all the different witness testimonies, ensuring that you had every bit of information, because it's not all put into one place. You have to go to certain websites, you have to go to certain sometimes news organizations that have paywalls, so you can't actually read what they've written. You have to know where to look for different types of statements by officials. Sometimes it's only on their Telegram channels. Sometimes it's on their Facebooks, Instagram, or Twitters. And so when you don't have all of the information in one place, then you're only going to see the information that fits within your following, which means within your bubble of information. And the issue with that is that you're only going to see information, most likely, that will go hand in hand with whatever belief you have. So if you're perceiving the IDF as targeting medical personnel as in a systematic manner, then most likely you're also following pages that perceive the IDF in that manner, and then they're only going to be talking about those testimonies and those pieces of evidence. If you're an individual that believes that the IDF does everything in its capability to not harm those who are innocent or those who are not involved in combat, then you're going to be following pages that also adhere to that type of ideology. And so you're only going to see information that adheres to that. And so my idea was, let's take all the information possible and be able to hand this information to journalists so that they can come to their own conclusions based on all the information available.
From what I've seen at this point, it seems like there's still very much 2 conflicting narratives. Like, I'm still seeing, when we scroll down through here, you mentioned the New York Times video, and I'll link in the description. But like, these were very clearly ambulances with lights blaring, for one, right? Like, that was hard to, you see that and you're like, that is an ambulance. I know one of the things that people talked about following this was I saw a lot of comments of people saying, there's a guy with a gun. I couldn't. I can't tell. Have you heard much about that? Was that a piece of this at all?
Yeah. So first, when it comes to the lights, so in the initial statement by the IDF, so we have to go quickly through a timeline of events. So the event occurred in
Right.
the early morning of March 23rd, and then the bodies began to be exhumed on March 27th. I think it was March 27th is when they found the leader of the civil defense crew that was killed at the scene, and then they were only able to actually excavate the bodies that were buried, partially buried or completely buried by the IDF on March 30th. And so, kind of a day or two after that March 30th, the IDF released their initial statement where they claimed that, according to the soldiers in the field, the second column of ambulances and medical service vehicles were not with any lights and they were moving suspiciously. Then the New York Times video dropped, and it showcased that, as Preston just said, they did have their lights and sirens on, and they were clearly marked. And that's when the IDF released another statement saying that they were told the wrong information by one of the soldiers in the field as to what occurred. Regarding the rifle, so there is a lot of debate over what we're seeing in the footage, but based on my own personal views in terms of my analysis, there's no rifle visible in the actual footage. All we're seeing is the way in which the shadow is moving with the person. But there are two unique things to take into account here. One is that this was also never claimed by the IDF. In both of their statements, they say that none of the medical crew that were in the second convoy were armed or there was no firefight. They state very, very blatantly that they misidentified them or they identified them as moving suspiciously, and therefore the soldiers opened fire. They never mention any type of weaponry being involved. However, something that is interesting is that in the official statements by the Palestinian Red Cross Society and the Civil Defense Group, they both mention that all of their personnel were with, flak jackets. They were very, very visibly identified as medics. So when they were moving around, there are two people that we see that seem to exit from the actual fire truck. That's the first vehicle that gets there. You have one person that is very, very clearly visible as a medic. You'll see that later on in the video there, where you can clearly see him as a medic. However, the second guy who we all...
Wait, this guy in the left
so
here,
that
you're
guy,
saying is clear?
No, the other
What
guy.
makes you
Go to
say
the next
he's...
photo.
Oh,
Go to the next photo. There. You can see clearly that this guy is dressed as a medic would be dressed within the Gaza Strip. And so we know that he was dressed. However, the second guy who came out of the fire truck does not have any identifying markers on him at all. And so the question is why?
You
Because
brought
that
up an
goes
interesting
directly
point there.
against the statements.
You brought up an interesting point about the firearm, because I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the IDF buried these bodies, and which is in line with standard practice in Gaza. That's not unusual. But that means that they were right on top of this spot. So if there were weapons falling out the back of an ambulance, I feel like that would have been mentioned. Just the way this conflict has gone, that would have been something that would have been a headline. Ambulance shows up hiding AK-47s, and that wasn't in there. So I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point.
Yeah, it would have been an immediate point that the IDF would have latched onto, showcasing, because the IDF have mentioned time and time again of different Palestinian militant groups within the Gaza Strip using medical facilities or personnel in order to, as human shield, so to speak, as in to shield their activities. And so this would have been a prime example of that had they actually had any type of rifle on them. And the IDF never claimed this in either one of their statements.
Oh, here's the picture. I should have just gone down a little bit further. This is the guy that they're saying has a rifle. Or some have said.
It all depends on when you decide to screenshot the video, but if you look at the video, and I don't know if later on in the actual analysis there's the actual video, there's no rifle visible. It's the weird shadow in his leg because of how the angle of the ambulance with the shadows that are coming in.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, my gut at that point would say no rifle.
It's based both on the visual aid that we have, but also based on the IDF testimony, which has an incentive to say that he was armed, and they don't.
Okay, so take us. What's next then? We kind of, this is something that I'm sure it's frustrating for me, and I'm sure you deal with this all the time. Is it seems like a lot of the conversation then centered around whether or not this one guy had a rifle, and I'm not sure that's the overall question that you're trying to answer in all of this. So where do you go from
Well,
there? When you saw
I
this
think
footage,
when
what's the big thing?
no, of course not. I think that's yeah. So I think that's something that's very important to take into consideration with these type of events is that every single side wants to discredit the other when it comes to these type of events because it makes one side look really bad. It either showcases the IDF ambushing either on purpose or due to negligence of its own forces or a myriad of other different things targeting medical services, or it showcases Hamas or other operatives using medical transports in order to conduct activities against the IDF. Both of these conclusions are very, very bad for one side. And so what people try to do is they latch onto a specific point, and that becomes the story. I saw this happen in real time with the gun footage. I saw one commentator mention it, and then everybody else just started sharing it, not trying to look into it, not trying to verify if it's real or not. And I see this time and time again. It has nothing to do with certain political views or beliefs or sides of the spectrum. I see this with every single type of controversy that people will simply latch onto any little bit of information that might help their perspective. But again, if you actually look at the full picture of information, which is the witness testimonies by the IDF, they don't align with this, which doesn't make any sense. They would have stated that there was a rifle if there was.
That would have benefited Israel to say there was a rifle.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. It's interesting. I shared the footage and I had people immediately come back and say, and I talked about it in a shorter video where I didn't show the footage, and I immediately had a lot of people say there was a rifle there. A guy gets out with a rifle, and I went back and looked a couple times and thought maybe I'm just not seeing what they're seeing or something. But you're right, that narrative catches hold and it just goes, and then somebody sees that comment and they go with it, and it just spirals and spirals. What were some other big portions around this specific thread that kind of stood out to you? I know that we've spent a lot of time on the rifle. What else is there?
So it's there's two things. It's the initial contact and one of the narratives that kind of built up regarding trying to cover up evidence or trying to commit a massacre and then cover it up from the public view. And so first is there are two witness testimonies that we have as well as the IDF statement that both don't make sense. So you have two witness testimonies. First, you have Abid, who was in the initial ambulance or vehicle that was ambushed, that was fired upon. And according to his testimony, it's right in the beginning, according to his own testimony, he was responding to airstrikes or bombardment going on in Tal al-Sultan, where the IDF was operating that early morning. And his vehicle was ambushed by the IDF. The two medics in the front seat were killed. He ducked in the back, and so he survived. The IDF dragged him out of the vehicle and then apprehended him. They tied him up, but they didn't blindfold him, and so then he saw the other events occurring. According to the IDF, it was a Hamas vehicle that they had interacted with. They fired upon this Hamas police car, and then they killed one of the operatives and detained two of them. And so right off the bat, we have an issue here. Because according to the IDF, there were two operatives who survived, and according to Abid, two of them were killed. And so both of these conflict 100% with one another. They don't align. And the issue with this is that we do have photo of what appears to be the initial ambulance. If you go a little bit down to the personal analysis, when I was trying to figure out what the vehicles belong to in terms of which agencies, the Civil Defense or the Red Cross, a little bit down, the next one, the next slide, here. So when I was going over, I noticed that the initial vehicle doesn't have any markings of a Red Cross ambulance. If you look at the footage, there's no markings on this ambulance at all. It's completely white, at least the way that we see it in the footage. And however, this is what the ambulances are supposed to look like, roughly. They have different varieties, but they always have roughly this type of insignia and different types of symbols. And so my initial thought was, okay, so Abid was driving in an ambulance that wasn't properly marked, and that's why they were fired upon, and they were misidentified as a Hamas vehicle. I tried looking up different examples of Hamas vehicles. Some of them are just completely white. They're similar, but not exactly the same model. And they usually have like one insignia and sometimes a blue line, but it really, really depends. So I couldn't find an exact match. So this vehicle looks like an exact model used by the Red Cross, but it doesn't appear to have any in the insignia. So like, oh, maybe this explains why the IDF thought that they were firing on Hamas. But it doesn't make sense with the testimony by Abid. Because you could say, oh, well, Abid's lying, right? Abid simply is lying. The IDF told the truth. Then why was Abid let go by the IDF? Because if he was a Hamas operative in this initial ambush, he wouldn't have been let go at 4 p.m. the same day. And so that's an issue that I have with the initial contact. That doesn't make sense. So to reiterate and kind of summarize, because it's a little bit all over the place, you have a story of an ambush where 2 medics were killed and 1 survived and was let go. And then you have the other story of an initial contact with a Hamas police vehicle where 1 of them was killed, 2 of them are taken into custody. But the problem is you have Abid, the living witness, who was let go. And if he was a Hamas operative, why was he let go?
I didn't know about the individual being released. Everything that I've seen, just again, I've been very high level on this, nowhere near the weeds that you're playing around in. But it was almost exclusively, did the IDF open fire on what are clearly ambulances, yes or no, and did they lie about it? I didn't know there was this extra layer involved, which makes it even harder to understand exactly what happened.
Another issue is with the ambushes. So we have a video of a Golani commander not long before this event occurred, where he's talking about how fire on everything that you see within different zones that are evacuated and different areas, that strung up a lot of controversy. And so we can connect this to the event and say, oh, because Golani was involved and they were firing on all the ambulances, then this was a targeted attack either against everybody going through the area or simply against the medical teams. The issue with this is that according to both the Red Cross and the IDF, around 3:55 a.m. to the 3:55 till 3:30 a.m. Sorry, for 3:55 a.m. is when they initially started sending out ambulances to where the areas that were there were airstrikes upon them, and the first ambulance went by the area without being harmed at all, and only the second ambulance, which was Abid's or the vehicle, was ambushed, and not the first one. And another thing is that when the IDF was still in the area later that day at around 6:30, a UN vehicle and some civilian vehicles passed through the area without any issues either. And so this doesn't make sense. Why were these other vehicles allowed to pass through and not this convoy?
Well, so, and everything, all of Tal's information will be in the description below, as well as his organization, Fake Reporter. Do you guys, so be sure to check those guys out. They're doing really impressive work. This kind of stuff right here, right? I'm sure it's got to be so frustrating, man, because you watch these narratives just go, and then it takes, as you mentioned, time to get back in and kind of unravel what we actually know and what we don't. And unfortunately, I mean, I'm sure this thread's got a ton of views, right? It's going to be a fraction of the 100,000 views. Great. That's really good. It reached a lot of people. It's probably, less than 1% of those who heard about the rifle or the executions or whatever it might be. Do you guys ever get into...
see, when the actual thread, it only goes down to 600,000.
Do you guys ever get into... I saw you started to make a personal assessment of where there's some conflicting information. Do you guys ever make an assessment of here's what we think happened? Or do you stay out of that part of the analysis?
So sometimes we will put in our own assessment if we have proper information to back it up. We try not to speculate too much. With this type of thread specifically, when I was going over it with the team and trying to think of like what method did we want to figure out who's to blame? Did we want to go over actually do kind of a more investigation? And I thought about it and I thought that my job is to ensure that the general public has factual information in front of them. What they do with that information is up to them. And so that's the point of this thread. It isn't to come to a conclusion as to who's to blame and who isn't to blame. It's all the information provided, showcasing all the issues with it, that with the information that we currently have available, and the public can decide, because we believe, as an organization and me personally, that our society, democratic societies in general, can function a lot better if the public actually have access to proper and factual information. Because I think that a lot of the discourse that we have online or in general is very, very much tainted because we aren't all initiating that conversation or engaging in that conversation with the same information. Just like this thread, Preston, you just said that, oh, I didn't know about that. And so how are we supposed to even begin having a conversation on who's to blame if we both don't have all the information at our disposal together?
That's probably a good idea. It's got to be tempting at times. And, unfortunately, that's the internet today, right? Like the videos and the posts that do well are when you're like, I uncovered this secret that nobody wants you to know about, even if it's just completely made up. So it does seem like the incentives, unfortunately, are kind of pushed towards come to that conclusion, even if you're only 90% sure. And of course, then say you're 150% sure, so people buy it. But I think there's probably a lot of respect gained by not taking that extra step and just stopping shy and saying, you know what, I even if you see where it's going and saying that's the info, we'll stop right there. I think it's probably a good move. And that's the reason I asked that rather than asking for your personal assessment. I didn't know if that was something you guys did or not, but I like that. I like that position.
Mm-hmm. Another thing.
All right,
I
so
think that's
what are you looking out for
is,
now? Go ahead, Tal.
Yeah. So one thing that is missing is the story of the UN vehicle. So in the initial assessments made by both the Palestinian Red Cross Society and the Civil Defense, as well as the IDF, there's no mention of a UN vehicle at all. But in the death toll of those who were killed, they do mention a UN officer, that there were 6 Civil Defense medics that were killed, 8 Red Cross Society medics that were killed, and 1 UN officer. There's no name for this UN officer, and there's no real clear understanding as to what his connection to the story is. In just a recent statement that was released, it's not in the thread yet. I saw it yesterday, and I'm waiting for more information before I add little bits of information. They said that a later UN vehicle that came was ambushed and also hit. And that's the first time we've ever heard of the UN vehicle being involved in these ambushes. Beforehand, all we knew is that there was a UN officer that was killed, and then we saw the wreckage of a UN vehicle on May 30th when they were taking out the bodies and the vehicles from the dirt mounts. And so that was something that is interesting to me, is to have more detailed explanation as to, was the UN vehicle a separate vehicle that was ambushed, and why was it ambushed? Was anything happening that the IDF decided to ambush it, or was there lost contact, or what was happening there? We're also waiting for the IDF's final assessment. And my hope is that in their current assessment, when it comes to the targets identified, in their initial assessment, they said based on, I just want to read it to you exactly so I don't mess up the information. In the initial assessment, there were 9 operatives belonging to Hamas and the PIJ, which is the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, with one of them being named Mohammed Shubaki. They don't add a photo for any of these names. And then in their second staple, on April 5th, I think it is, they say that 6 of the 15 slain medics were immediately identified by intelligence officials as Hamas operatives. So now they're no longer discussing Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And something I found a little bit odd is they say 6 of the 15 medics. And the reason that's interesting is there were only 14 medics in terms of the 14. What was it? There were only 14 slain medics. Because the 15 was the officer. And so my question is, Did they write that based on the Red Cross Society's assessment, or were they writing that based on the assessment of the soldiers in the field? Now, it's important to understand that not everybody who's involved in this scenario do we know the whereabouts of them. There was an additional medic who was, according to the witness testimonies of both the fisherman and Abid, the initial medic, there was another medic belonging to the Palestinian Red Cross Society who was alive after the gunfire. He was taken into custody by the IDF, and then he disappeared. Nobody knows where he is. Just now, according to the Palestinian Red Cross Society, just yesterday I think it was, the International Committee for the Red Cross confirmed that he was being held in IDF he was being held by the IDF. So this is not in the thread yet. This I still need to add. But that's something that we just found out yesterday. That according to the police, the Red Cross just confirmed that he was being held. Now, another group that doesn't really make sense is that we have the initial ambush of Abid and his ambulance or contact with Hamas. Let's just go over on the language of ambush just to ease the conversation here. Mm-hmm. His convoy was ambushed. In between his convoy being ambushed at, according to him, it was 4:20 a.m. and the second convoy coming at around 5:20, 5:10, it varies. There was a fisherman and his son going or returning from the beach that were taken into custody. We don't know if they came in a vehicle, and my question is, why were they taken captive? Why weren't they shot upon? Like, why was they allowed to walk into this kill zone that the IDF had established there? According to them, it was established to ambush, and they were kept alive. Another issue is, why were any of them kept alive? Why was Abid, the fisherman, and his son kept alive if the soldiers blatantly realized that they had fired upon innocent medics, and according also to Abid, they had executed them at close range? So you have IDF soldiers, according to Abid, committing blatant war crimes, also according to the other officer, yet they kept them alive, and then they used them in order to evacuate people who were in the area later that day, and then they just let them go at 4 p.m. It doesn't make sense, what was happening there on the ground.
Is there a chance here, just shot in the dark, that we're talking about different locations? So even if it's just a couple hundred meters apart, maybe people have different... I'm just the stories are so conflicted. I'm trying to come up with an idea as to why so many things can be different.
Yeah. So we, based on satellite imagery that Al Jazeera showcased, as well as footage that we have from the event, the ambulance and the second convoy at least were all in the exact same area. It's over there in this footage. All the right there, we also see it from the footage that we have one vehicle at the side of the road, and then we have 4 ambulances and a fire truck come to the area, and they're ambushed. So that it all happened in the exact same area. Whether or not the fisherman and the son were ambushed or taken into custody or interrogated at a different point and then brought into the area, I don't know. It's a good question, but I don't think so based on the information that we have at the moment. They also weren't blindfolded, which I think is interesting. They were bound by their hands, but they weren't blindfolded.
Tyler, super helpful, man. I think that it seems like the big thing that we're waiting on right now is the IDF analysis, their official investigation. Hopefully there's some additional light shed on this. But as we're kind of wrapping up, is there anything you want to say about your organization, the work you're doing at Fake Reporter? Make sure we get people over there to check it out.
Yeah, of course. So thank you guys all for listening. Of course, you can find all the information and all the sources that I use within the actual thread. And if you have any additional questions about information within the thread, you're welcome to reach out to me on my X account. And so my organization, Fake Reporter, we're an Israeli organization that deals with malicious content online through a collaboration between experts and people in the field. And people in the field is all of you. Think about it in your personal lives. All of you have your own expertise in the way in which you see the world. Some of you are doctors, some of you were in the military, some of you were in healthcare, or every single field of life. And there are different things that you see online that are false, that are malicious, that are active dissemination of disinformation that only you can spot because you know that it's not true based on your expertise. And so through your expertise, you notify us, and then we together can tell the general public that these things are falsehoods. And so that's what our organization does. We deal with not just this type of OSINT work in terms of mis and disinformation. We deal with malicious content from bot networks, foreign adversaries, hate speech, incitement online, conspiracies, and different types of hateful conduct that harm us as a general public to be able to have proper fact-based discussions.
It's awesome. Tal, thank you so much for taking the time to talk through all this today and all of your work in general. It's really valuable, not just, of course, to me, but to a lot of people. And hopefully a lot of people learning about you today can head over and follow what you and Fake Reporter are doing. But thank you so much again, man, for walking through this, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much for the time. Thank you.
All right, hope you enjoyed the conversation. And thank you, of course, so much to Tal and the team over at Fake Reporter for taking the time to put this thread together and then walk us through it start to finish. Of Of course, I'll have all of Tal and his company's information in the description below, so be sure to give them a follow. Check out the other work they're doing. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.